Welcome to an introduction to 18 U.S.C. Section 207A2, the Post-Employment Statute's 2-year restriction on matters for which an employee had official responsibility. In this session, you'll be briefly introduced to the statutory elements of the A2 restriction, and we will provide clarifying summaries. We'll introduce a process you can use to help you apply the statutory elements to any facts you may have regarding an employee's proposed post-employment activities in order to provide prospective advice before the employee terminates service with the government. We'll then assign an exercise where you'll be asked to analyze the post-employment profile of a hypothetical employee to determine whether and how the employee's post-employment activities may be subject to the 207A2 restrictions. Once you've completed the exercise, you should review the debrief of the exercise, because it is in that debrief that we will examine more closely the definitions and interpretations of the statutory elements. So what are the elements of 207A2? If you've already watched the introduction to 207A1, this chart will look strikingly familiar. We've combined the A1 and A2 restrictions in this same chart for that very purpose, to illustrate that the A2 restrictions are virtually identical to the A1 restrictions, but for two key differences. For purposes of 207A2, the bar begins at the end of government service and extends for 2 years from the date of termination from service. It prohibits a former employee from knowingly making any appearance or communication with the intent to influence to or before an employee of the United States on behalf of any other person in connection with particular matters involving specific parties, where the U.S. is a party or has a direct and substantial interest, provided it is the same particular matter involving specific parties that was pending under the employee's official responsibility during their last year of government service. So where are the elements of 207A2 defined? As with all of 207, the implementing regulation is at 5 CFR Part 2641. The specific guidance on the application of the A2 restrictions is found at 2641.202, with cross-references back to 2641.201 for certain definitions. What does 207A2 bar? As was the case with A1, it is essentially the same representational bar. It prohibits employees from making communications or appearances back to an employee of the United States if those communications or appearances are with the intent to influence the United States government and they are made on behalf of third parties. As was the case with A1, these communications or appearances have to be in connection with specific party matters. For A2, it has to be specific party matters that were actually pending under the employee's official responsibility during the last year of service. 207A2 does not bar self-representation. It does not bar behind-the-scenes assistance. It does not restrict where an employee may work. And it does apply to uncompensated activities as it does to compensated activities. What is the purpose of 207A2? As was the case with 207A1, it is in part a switching sides provision, which is essentially to prevent employees from giving unfair advantage to a prospective employer, for example, or of appearing to make unfair use of their prior government employment and affiliations. And this is especially true for supervisors and managers, because there is a cooling off period aspect to A2, which basically wants to keep former supervisors and managers from unfairly using any vestigial influence they may have by virtue of the authority they enjoyed as a supervisor or manager. So who is covered under 207A2 and for how long? 207A2 applies to employees who had official responsibility for directing governmental action with respect to specific party matters. In other words, supervisors and managers. In other words, people who were overseeing the personal and substantial participation of others on specific party matters. For how long does this restriction last? For 2 years after the date of termination from government service. So what do I need to know in order to give advice on 207A2? 207A2, as was the case with 207A1, is very intimately tied to the specific party matters that the employee had pending under their official responsibility during their last year of government service. So we have to begin by identifying any of those specific party matters that may have been pending. Effectively, 207A2 is a 1-year look back from the date of termination to capture any specific party matters that would have been pending under the employee's official responsibility during that time. Once we've identified any specific party matters, then we have to query the employee about any proposed post-employment activities to determine whether the employee will be representing others back to the government on the same matters that had been pending under their official responsibility. This is a 2-year restriction that begins tolling at the date of termination of service. How does A2 differ from A1? Personal and substantial participation is an A1 concept. For supervisors and managers, it has a very specific meaning, which is it includes matters where the employee has engaged in direct and active supervision of a subordinate. So if a supervisor or manager has actively and directly supervised the work of another employee on a specific party matter, for purposes of A1, that supervisor or manager has him or herself participated personally and substantially in that specific party matter, and they would have an A1 permanent bar as to those specific party matters. That is distinguishable from matters that are pending under official responsibility. Matters that are pending under the employee's official responsibility are matters that the employee has actually received for assignment to others, and those may be matters that they have yet to participate or may never participate personally and substantially in. Similarly, any matters that have been referred to or are under consideration by any person that employee supervises are going to be matters that are pending under their official responsibility. So for people who are higher up in the chain of command, anything that has been referred to or is under consideration by anyone in that chain of command is going to be deemed to be a matter that's under the official responsibility of that individual. So how do I conduct my analysis? In order to facilitate your analysis, we've suggested an analytical process that effectively groups and orders the elements of 207A2 into 3 steps. We begin with government duties. We identify any specific party matters that may have been pending under the employee's official responsibility during their last year of service. And then we query the employee about those post-employment activities to identify any activities they may be contemplating. Once we have that information, we want to identify, if at all possible, whether or not any of those post-employment matters would be the same matters that were pending under the employee's official responsibility. The process looks like this. We take each of the elements of the statute and we plug them into the 3 steps of the analysis. We have a practice exercise that we would like you to undertake. Our hypothetical employee is Ken Dickens, who is Supervisory Counsel at the Food and Drug Administration. We've given you a worksheet that has both A1 and A2 elements on it. We will ask you to do both an A1 and A2 analysis on the information that Ken provides to you about his post-employment prospects. We've given you a copy of Part 2641. We've given you the Federal Register version because we will be making reference to various parts of the preamble in our debrief, and so we would recommend that you use this or at least have this available when you watch the debrief. We've given you a summary of the 2641 provisions for 18 U.S.C. sections 207A1 and A2. We remind you that this is not a legal document. It is meant to be a desk reference or job aid. This is the methodology that we will be using as we go through our practice exercise. We begin with, is Ken an employee for purposes of 207A2? Were any specific party matters pending under Ken's official responsibility during his last year of service? We would ask you to be thinking about the critical distinctions for supervisors between personal and substantial and pending under official responsibility, and ask the question, did Ken participate personally and substantially in any specific party matters? What is an appearance or communication? When is there an intent to influence? On whose behalf might Ken be making the appearance or communication? Whom may Ken not appear before or communicate with? What is the same particular matter? When is the U.S. a party, or does the U.S. have a direct and substantial interest? Are there any applicable exceptions? Once you've completed the exercise, we would ask you to proceed to the exercise debrief, where we will apply both the A2 and A1 provisions to Ken's proposed post-employment activities. Thank you.